Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us here at St. John's High School. My name is Ismail Alpha. I am CBC Radio's afternoon show host, up to speed on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, 3 to 6, Monday through Friday. This is a very special CBC Asks Town Hall, a chance for all of us to have an open and hopefully enlightening conversation and discussion about things that matter to Manitobans and matter to all Manitobans. First, I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, and Dakota peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I would also like to welcome those of you joining us on digital, our CBC Indigenous Facebook and CBC Manitoba Facebook, as well as YouTube and Twitter. Now, let's spell out the game plan for you here. I'm joined by my CBC colleagues. Hopefully they're all standing so I can see them all in the crowd. If you can just look over to my right here, actually. The CBC's Leonard Monkman is to the right of the stage with the yellow microphone in his hand. We have from CBC Indigenous, so he's from CBC Indigenous, Jillian Taylor from our CBC Newsroom. Where are you, Jillian? There she is to my left. And Marcy Marcusa, host of CBC's Information Radio, our morning show at the back at the top of the stairs there for you. We've also invited special guests whom you're going to hear from throughout the program. But for the most part, we will give the audience a chance to listen, share your thoughts, and ask your questions. And though we have brought in special guests for specific interviews, this is really about the conversation that you are all in as well. So we welcome your questions and comments, and that's why there are 4 hosts here to take care of the event. You may have noticed some cameras. They're hard to miss. This is being recorded for radio, and highlights of tonight's town hall will be broadcast tomorrow night on CBC Television News at 6 and throughout the coming days on CBC Radio and, of course, our CBC Manitoba website. Now, tonight's town hall takes on a powerful and, for many, a very personal subject: truth and reconciliation. It's been close to 3 years since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released its report and its 94 calls to action. 94 blueprints for change, for governments, faith groups, and communities to make right some of the things that were wrong, some of the wrongs as far as that were inflicted in residential schools. Now, this week, the CBC created and launched Beyond 94. That's an interactive website that's progress of each and every one of these calls to action. The question tonight: what's reconciliation worth to you? It's going to be a chance to find out what we're willing to give up, where we're failing, and where we go from here. And that's why tonight's conversation is so important. We need to find some ways to figure things out and plan for the future. And we need to do all of this without getting ugly, with hopes of working this down to some answers. What better place to host this event with this conversation than here at St. John's High School in the heart of Winnipeg's North End? Now, this school and the people in it are a great example of reconciliation in action. Students here host regular smudge ceremonies. The residential school experience is taught in the classrooms, and they even have a grad coach to help kids cross that finish line into graduation. So a huge, huge shout out to St. John's High School. Put your hands together. Now, before we begin our programming, let me welcome Marge Rosselli back to lead us in operating or in opening remarks and ceremony.
My relatives. My name is Marge Rosselli. I'm from Sioux Valley, Dakota Nation, west of Brandon. I've traveled here today with my friend, and it's an honor to be here to hear what is being done for truth and reconciliation. It's been a time of hardship for First Nations people as we've come through a hard time, a hard legacy for our grandparents, our parents, ourselves. When I say that, I say personally from my heart. My grandparents, my parents, my siblings and I all went to residential school. And it takes a lot of courage to live through the things that we've experienced as a family, as an individual. And I know that many, many of our peoples, First Nations people, have come through so many traumatic things that have affected their lives and their families' lives, even to this day. It's something that we are struggling to overcome and go through. And this effort at reconciliation is something that I welcome for all our people, that we may all reach a place of healing, a place of understanding for each other, with each other, that we may walk in peace and harmony and equally as human beings. The way Wakantanka, our Creator God, created us to be. No one higher, no one lower. But all living things are equal on Mother Earth. And I wanted to say thank you to the school for hosting this and the great work that they're doing. And I want to thank CBC for this town hall tonight. And I've been asked to come in and make some remarks and to say a prayer. And Dakota is my first language. When I was born, that was the language that the Creator gave me. You know, a long time ago, you had to live to be 8 years old before you could start school. And then the Indian agent made sure you attended school. And when I went to school, I didn't know a word of English. And so I don't remember the first years of my school. I don't know how I communicated. I know my cousin took me to school. My parents didn't want me to go, but I don't know how he introduced me. I have no recollection of that. And then later on, I went to residential school. But my language is something that I've kept, the traditions of my people, the culture as a Dakota. And so when I speak from my heart, it's usually in Dakota. And I always say that I'm fluent in English. You know, some people always say I'm fluent in Dakota or I'm fluent in Cree. But Dakota is my first language, and I'm fluent in English, the other way around. So if you'll bear with me, and you can all help me in your own way to say a prayer as we greet this evening and the work that's going to go on tonight. And we ask for Wakantanka's guidance and his help as we go through the many things. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. And you know how it stings sometimes, makes our eyes water. But I'm here to try and help you, and I know that we can't do a smudge this evening. I brought my things with me, but I know that a lot of these buildings are not meant for smoke, and we might turn the water sprinklers on or something, so I'm willing to meet with you individually if anybody needs a smudge. And it'll have to be outside the building, but I'll be available for that. So I would like to say the prayer now. Hata Wakantaka. Amachbek Tanakechi Makata Hituna. Amichincho Shikam Kachiaponte. Ader Takia Kidu Hinashipunka. Atako Tiwoda Kapte, Ohana Takuki. Chante Unkishi Chaptanka. Oh, ya kepta was agya. Tona daha o yankaya hipi. Taya was agya. Tokata kia zania yokpe maunepta. O hechrum shichia hoi chichi o yatiki dina tok chidero yanka peunka. Ama kochi der. Amaniwacha kasamana. Na ate. Taya wasna. Na batuk chus yokpe tokata ki maunepta. Hatakura shichik tishni hechrum shichia hoi chichionka. Amichinchon shuka maki na makhwayata kantaka. Unshon kira bedi na taku shichiki na iwonda kaba. Tokata ki ta odio. Ohiap ta na kiapon. Ohechil wachinchie. Unshon kira be taku iwonda kapke na kiab. Awash agya ma onipta. Na batuk chus yok pe ohiap ta hechil. Ushiche hoye chicheche. Amichinchon shukam kuchaba makata hito anhoate. Oshukira be mitaku kichista kihana obmanik de tokata kia. Iok pechanta washte hiap tizania. Ahechite. Amitaka obaniktacha. Amitaka was. Amen.
Just the cutest. She turns around and asks me, "Am I done?" Well, of course, and thank you very much for the offer for those who would like to smudge. So we're going to let those who would like to smudge know that if you would like to, please flag down one of the CBC ambassadors. You'll notice them with the red CBC shirts. Flag one of them down and they will take you to Elder Marge Rosselli here and make sure you can smudge as well. Thank you very much. Let's start now with the program. First, I just want to remind viewers joining us for the town hall through CBC Indigenous and CBC Manitoba's Facebook. So we acknowledge that they are there. The crowd isn't just this big. We have many more people watching on their computers and so forth. Thank you for tuning in. And remember, we welcome your thoughts and comments throughout the evening. Leonard Monkman, who's with us here, one of our hosts, will make sure to field those comments and include you in the discussion here. Now, we are here tonight to talk reconciliation and what it's worth to you, what it's worth to you and everyone who's home watching on the screens of their computers as well, and everyone in this country. What is it worth to you? Before we do get to that point, though, we do want to let you know we have 3 trauma-informed health support workers standing by for anyone who hears a story or shares a story and feels the need for some support afterwards. We encourage you to reach out as needed, and you will notice them in the blue vests around the room. So if you feel you need to speak with someone as you react to stories that you hear or after telling stories of your own, please reach out to these wonderful people in the blue vests. Now, for many people, reconciliation is more than just a goal. It is a very, very personal thing for many people. Here now, stories from survivors of the residential school system and the truth behind their own reconciliation. A word of caution, some of the content may be disturbing, and again, we do have our trauma-informed health support workers standing by. Let's hear their voices.
The teacher, I never seen her smile. She used to throw chalk and that brushes at us. But she would get really upset. When she threw that brush, I used to catch it. And she used to get really mad. And one day she turned my ear and I could hear my ear cracking. And oh boy, that was, I never knew a teacher to do that. I think it turned me off from going to school. If that's what education is, then I don't want no part in it.
As a 5-year-old child, you walk into the school and you see so many other children crying. And then you have the older children come to you and tell you not to cry because it's going to get worse. But to walk up those stairs and to hear this woman speaking like English and telling me like, in an hour, wash yourself. Wash everything off, take that brown, wash off that brown skin. And there was soap, I don't know what kind of soap it was, but it burned. Like I remember the burn and the scrubbing and cry, like wanted to cry because it hurt.
And she said you...
Wash until you take all your brown skin off because God doesn't like brown skin.
I've been wrestling with reconciliation and what does it truly mean? How can a life of deprivation, really, of abuse, how do I reconcile that with this apology? I can tell you that it was normal.
What was normal?
The sexual abuse, the physical abuse, like the beatings were common.
And we weren't allowed to leave the residential schools. And from where I was, I'd go up to the 2nd level, and I could look out the window and see my house across the road. And I wasn't allowed to step out to go over. I went over one time, and they sent me back out of fear. When my sister came, when she first came the first year, they made an example of her because there was, her and a couple of kids had gotten into something, and they were just small little children, and we were all in a dorm, a little girls' dorm. Sister Rose came in and she said she's going to make an example out of out of what they had done, and that we weren't allowed to be able to do those things. So what they did was they took the three of them and they pulled their pants down and started whipping them, and I had to watch my little sister get whipped. Sorry. And I couldn't do anything to help her. And that was one of my responsibilities, because it was just her and I all the time, right?
I left the residential school. And after a while, I had to get counseling to take that junk out, what I experienced. That's not the end. There's other things that has to be righted, and it's not my turn. It's the other side's turn to right the wrongs.
Those were the voices of Wambadi Wakita, Louise Hall, Peter Yellowquill, and Deborah Kershane. We thank them and all other residential school survivors who lent their voices and shared their stories with the CBC's Beyond 94. We are grateful for their insights. Now let's get the conversation started. We have co-host Leonard Monkman, who is with guest Leah Gazan, joining us via Skype.
Hi. Thank you for having me. Leonard Monkman, Dujika, Zanamuzi, Bing, Dunji. Where are you at, Leah?
I'm currently on unceded Algonquin territory, otherwise known as Ottawa.
Okay. So we are joined by Leah Gazan. Leah Gazan is a professor at the University of Winnipeg. She's a longtime Indigenous rights activist, and she's joining us today from Ottawa. So we'll start off the conversation with basically what the whole topic is about. Leah, what is reconciliation worth to you?
Well, I think first you have to have truth before you can have reconciliation. And I know that, as we have just had, for those of you who consider this place Canada's 150th birthday, that 150 years has been marked by an adversarial relationship. I think going into the first year since the birthday, I think we had a real opportunity to change that adversarial relationship that has very much taken place in the courts, and I don't see that happening right now. I think one example, that certainly touches a chord with me is what's currently going on with survivors of St. Anne's Residential School, a residential school in the James Bay area in Ontario, where the federal government is being accused of suppressing and denying evidence being brought forward by survivors. And in January, I know the CBC noted that from survivors, they are playing legal hardball. So, I mean, we just heard the stories of survivors, and I want to thank them for that. One who's my uncle Wambadi. And, when somebody gives you with a story and you use it as a platform, you have to honor that story. And I don't think that's happening. And I feel hurt about that. Cindy Blackstock, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling, I just read an article today. I mean, they're on their fourth non-compliance order to honor the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling that ordered the Canadian government to immediately stop racially discriminating against First Nations children.
So
they still have not responded to that. So I think reconciliation is good. I don't feel that Indigenous people in this country are the ones on, and I agree with my uncle, are on the need to reconcile. I think it's the Canadian government and the Canadian population needs to reconcile how our relationships have resulted in human rights violations and violence against Indigenous peoples.
So at this point, do you feel like the whole discourse around reconciliation, do you feel like it's all talk? Do you feel like it's hollow words?
Well, I mean, I have to go with action. I'll give you another example. Today in the province of Manitoba, the Assembly of Manitoba's chiefs signed a resolution supporting 60s scoop survivors, kids that were wrongfully taken from their home, kidnapped from their home, shipped off to the States, Europe, to support them, because they articulated that they are not in support of the recent settlement because they weren't consulted. How can you reach a settlement when you haven't even involved the other parties on the other side of the table? Resource extraction projects, Kinder Morgan pipeline, Site C Dam, Muskrat Falls, without the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous people. And Senator Neufeld, along with unanimous support from senators today, voted in favor to persuade Trudeau to use whatever powers he has to push the pipeline through. Where's the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous people to develop on our lands? We're getting arrested today protecting their lands. I mean, I can go on. I have so many examples.
Can you hear me?
I think the talk is good.
Leah,
there's a lot of talk, but I don't see follow through on the action.
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I was going to ask is, you know, in light of the Gerald Stanley acquittal, the Cormier acquittal, how do you think those two cases on the prairies have affected, you know, reconciliation in Canada?
Well, I mean, I don't think we have moved towards reconciliation in terms of justice and government. I think certainly in terms of the work on the ground that I've, you know, been privileged to do with some of the church organizations, Kairos, Mennonite Church of Canada, Christian Peacemaker teams. I see churches jumping on board more so with the TRC. But I don't think anything has shifted. I think the injustice that was demonstrated towards Colton Bushy, the valuable life of Colton Bushy and Tina Fontaine, I think that injustice is something that we see regularly. I think the two cases that came down very close together really struck a chord. I certainly was really impacted by it. But I think we've seen lots of those examples. Canoe James from Roseau River First Nation, that's a case where a young Indigenous woman who was almost going to be released from jail died in her jail cell begging for help.
Yeah.
So we see all sorts of those examples.
Are you there?
Yeah. So I think we see all sorts of those examples.
I did get a chance to interview Murray Sinclair last week, and he talked about it from personal relationships and saying, you know, what kind of relationship do we want to have together in Canada? For him, a lot of it is relationship building. What type of advice would you have for the average Canadian who maybe wants to take a step towards working towards something like reconciliation? What advice would you have for them?
Well, I think relationships are certainly important, absolutely. But if you have relationships in the absence of rights, we still have water boil advisories around the country. Children, Indigenous children wake up every day in this country and are racially discriminated against. You know, I think, you know, relationships are one thing, but what does that relationship look like? I think, you know, if you don't respect the fundamental Indigenous human rights, the most basic rights, anybody, including Indigenous people, need to have joy, then it's difficult to have a good relationship.
How would they be able to join into building those or joining those fights?
Well, I think we saw an example with Bill C-262 that the government has voted in favor of to fully adopt and implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, although it's in committee. So we'll see what it looks like after it gets through committee. But people of all walks of life joined together and gave a very clear, loud message to the government that it's time in this country that we have basic human rights for Indigenous people, and as the TRC, and honor the promises made in the TRC to have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People as the framework for reconciliation. That was a joint effort that crossed religious lines, color lines, culture lines, regional lines, and it just shows the power of people in terms of pushing for change. But that change, that also provides a framework of what that relationship looks like, what that change looks like. And I think we need to go beyond fluffy rhetoric towards hard actions to ensure a better relationship going forward.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Leah. Can we give her a quick hand?
Now, I just want to take a moment here. We saw a video pack earlier, and I just want to acknowledge a shout out to one of the men you would have seen on the screen there who walked in, and I loved the entry. Peter Yellowquill joins us and walked in and said, "I missed my debut. Do you want my autograph?" And I told him I would wait until the end of the event to get the autograph, but I'm going to take you up on that. Now we go to Marcy Marcusa, who's in the audience with some questions and comments.
So I am here actually because I'm the one that gets to remind you that you came to talk, right? We listen, we watch, we think, but you came here tonight to also weigh in because we here in Manitoba are a whole community. So does anyone right off the hop want to put their hand up and have a question, and I'll come over and we'll talk? Does anyone have a comment? No? I'm a radio host. I always have a backup. No pressure. I want to introduce you to someone as we get ready for to hear from Ryan Moran on stage with Jillian Taylor in a moment. You might have heard today there was a big donation given to St. John's High School and to a couple of other high schools in Winnipeg. It's going to change the lives of students. And part of why that happened is because a young woman made a video about why it's important to fund students, all students, especially students in our inner city. Well, she's now a videographer. And she's made another video, and her second video is about truth and reconciliation, and she gave me permission to ask her what it's about because she's been thinking about our question tonight. What is truth and reconciliation to you? Her name is Freedom Smith Myron. She's one of my favorite people I've met in a very long time, and she's right here. Hello, you?
Hi.
Do you want to get up, or you feel better sitting? You want to sit or stand? Stand up, stand up. Can we have a little round of applause maybe for Freedom? So your video, when you made it and you're thinking about that, what is it worth to you? What does it mean? What do you think? What does it mean to you?
I believe, because my auntie told me that reconciliation comes from within. You have to forgive what happened, but you don't forget. And it will always live on in our family because 2 generations of my family went through residential schooling, and they were impacted pretty deadly. And yeah,
And in different ways you were sharing with me earlier, is that right? So you've watched people be impacted in very different ways. Can you share any of that?
There's some family members of mine that took pretty bad roads, and some that took the good path and everything, doing pretty good, but the one path is just drugs, alcohol, violence, and just in and out of jail. And it was kind of heartbreaking to see that because my uncles and aunties and my grandpa had to go through what had happened in residential schooling.
So you're in grade 11, right?
Yeah.
What is reconciliation worth to you?
I believe that it does come from within, forgive, don't forget, and be able to use what had happened in a good way to help people learn from it, and to educate people that don't know what had happened, teach them what had happened.
What do you hope people think about when they watch your video on reconciliation? I haven't seen that one yet. I saw your other one.
I hope they just realize that a lot of us are still struggling, even the generation that we're in now, we're struggling pretty hard with what had happened to our relatives and stuff.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Freedom. Thank you. Where do we get to see your video when it's out? Do you know yet? Not yet?
I just have to edit it.
Oh, you got to edit it. Okay. I know all about editing. Okay, you let us know, okay? Thanks, buddy. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And everyone here does too. Next, tonight, I would like to remind you, I'm the one with the mic, so I just want to remind you that we're paying attention to our guests and hearing and listening. If you have a thought and you want to jot it down, or you have a question while you're listening, little hands will work. And then if I see you, or if I look for quiet little hands, I can make my way around, and then I can certainly get the microphone over to you. I know the first couple people I actually asked before said, I'm here just to listen. And so to understand, and I actually loved the remark, because the man that said that to me, he said, I'm here just to listen because I don't think enough listening's been done. And that's poignant too. So next on stage, you see my colleague, Jillian Taylor and Rai Moran with our next interview.
So Rai is the director of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation here in Winnipeg at the University of Manitoba. And Rai, you've been working almost a decade with the TRC and now in this role. I know being at that event we were at about the Healing Garden a few weeks ago, the Healing Forest, one of the big takeaways was education. Of course, Justice Sinclair said that. When you hear Freedom talking about what she just said, you know, what does that mean to you hearing about her project?
Well, it means a lot, and I want to thank you for doing it, actually, because it's exceptionally important that as many people in society take this up as humanly possible. And most importantly, inside of the Indigenous community, that we work as hard as possible to heal the damage that has been inflicted upon us in all of the various ways that has happened. You know, healing in the current climate is very complicated, it's very difficult, and healing from any form of genocide is really harsh. We continue to live in a society where the foundations of that genocide are still very much present, and I think the collective healing work that's underway in this country needs to be both honored, needs to be celebrated, but we can never underestimate just how hard it actually is.
That's a conversation you and I have had before about healing, hearing you say that, just about how much pain there is, and you said to me that reconciliation, it's not easy. This is not an easy conversation. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, reconciliation is really, it's really serious. In November, we had a very serious conversation at the university involving some challenges that we were going through. And the elders said at that point, we can never, as a society, underestimate the depths of the waters that we find ourselves in when we have this conversation of reconciliation. Because this isn't about just smiling at one another and getting along nicer and playing nice in the sandbox in the here and now. This is about fundamental transformation of how we are in relationship with each other, with the land, between nations, between sovereignties, between systems of law and health, and it's exceptionally complicated. And on top of that, we are trying to heal collectively as Indigenous peoples in the aftermath of, at the very least, cultural genocide, and probably more accurately, true, actual, mean-spirited, outright genocide of Indigenous peoples here in this country. That has unleashed a systemic, intergenerational series of effects that will continue to reverberate for generations in this country. So these are very serious times, and the reality is that if we don't get this right, we will be in worse shape than we're in present. The stakes are getting higher for us as a human family. There's more of us on the planet. The ecosystem is being rapidly depleted, and the consequences of failure, especially in the aftermath of how much hope has been generated, will be particularly harsh, I think, this time around.
When we're talking about reconciliation, it's often done in such a positive lens. You know, we want to get there, we want to heal, we want to move forward as a society. Do you think that reconciliation is becoming a buzzword?
I do, and the question is, so even if it's a buzzword though, and I flop on this sometimes. Sometimes I find the word frustrating, sometimes I feel like it's being hollowed out, sometimes I feel like it's being co-opted, and all of that is true because all of that is actually happening. But the question is even if that's the case, is there still value in the word? Does it still give us something to rally around? Does it give us a reason to have a hard conversation? Does it give us a reason to assemble in a group like this? Does it give us an opportunity to talk about something that is very, very difficult? And I think that is the case. And I think we have to honor and hold this word, as imperfect as it is, very close. And we have to make sure, even as Indigenous peoples, that we continue to define what it means. Because if we look at the actual definition of what how the Commission defined it and how the settlement agreement defined it and how RCAP defined it, what we're talking about doing, and what we heard our elders say tonight, what we're talking about doing is establishing respectful relationships, right? And that's a process. But we need a reason to come together and have that conversation and a reason to sit down. And if that's framed through the word reconciliation, well, that's okay. Even if it is a buzzword, let's just get together and talk it out and make the change that's necessary and take the action that's necessary.
So I've been hearing this a lot lately. A lot of Indigenous people have been saying that, you know, we're kind of tired of carrying this torch. This shouldn't just be our fight. So who is responsible for making reconciliation happen through all the work you've done? What do you think?
Okay, so we got to be very, very, very clear about the relationship as it sits at present in this country. One, Indigenous peoples know a lot about non-Indigenous peoples. We are forced to know a lot about non-Indigenous peoples because we are forced to live in a society that we didn't choose and we had imposed upon us collectively. But non-Indigenous peoples know basically nothing about us Indigenous peoples. They know very little of our social, political, cultural aspirations, nothing about our languages, nothing about our histories and traditions, don't know what the word Manitoba means, have no idea where it comes from. I mean, the list goes on. So it's a very unequal and one-sided relationship, and the knowledge level is unequal. Then we have to remember that in a scenario where somebody has been abused, that the person that is on the receiving end of that abuse gets to set the rules of engagement after that point. You know, and what has happened to Indigenous peoples in many ways, shapes, and forms is a lot of abuse in this country. It's not just through the residential schools, it's through a whole bunch of other mechanisms that have been unleashed on Indigenous peoples. So the challenge that we have is to equalize the level of understanding that we have of each other, and that's where education is so fundamental in this, and new dialogue and cultural humility is actually so fundamentally important, because if we're going to have this respectful relationship, it has to start from a principle or a premise of equality, and we just don't live in that society yet. We're so far away from that.
Thank you so much for leaving that for us to all think about. We're going to go back to Ismaila now.
Thank you very much, Jillian. I just want to remind everybody, and I'm going to be doing this throughout the evening intermittently, that we do have 3 trauma-informed health support workers standing by for anyone who feels when they hear a story or shares a story that they need some support afterwards. So we encourage you to reach out if you feel you do need support. As mentioned, you will notice them. They have the blue vests on around the room. So if you do feel you need to speak with somebody, please do reach out for support from them. Also, I will remind you of Elder Marge Rosselli's offer to smudge for those who would like to partake. So if you would like to smudge this evening, reach out to one of our CBC ambassadors. You can't miss them either. We've got everybody color-coded today for you with their jerseys on. CBC ambassadors in the red, just reach out to one of them and they will connect you with Elder Marge Rosselli to smudge. And now, I believe Leonard Monkman has some questions from Facebook, comments and questions from Facebook.
So we would like to thank everybody for asking questions on Facebook. Nobody in the audience has asked any questions yet, so that's the push right there. We do have a question from Jasmine Aurora. She asks, what's one piece of advice you would give non-Indigenous teachers that will help make their classrooms culturally safe spaces? I'm joined here today by, you want to stand up for the camera?
Buja Anin. Ndewe Magutak, Noah Wilson. I guess to answer that question is, it kind of reminds me of an actual experience I was a part of in terms of being in a course on Indigenous governance in the justice system, and I'm lucky enough to have a classmate who's actually a residential school survivor. Her name's Victoria Gamond, and the course was being taught by a non-Indigenous professor. And, you know, I think it's important that non-Indigenous professors, you know, not be shied away from speaking about reconciliation and not being shied away from having that conversation as a non-Indigenous person. But I also think it's very important to be mindful of the people who've been affected by residential school system and who've been affected by the justice system, and to make sure that those truths are acknowledged, because, you know, if you look at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the first step is truth, and to acknowledge those truths and to really understand that you have to come from a place of allyship and not speaking as if you understood the experience from yourself. I think that can really turn off a lot of people. But in terms of providing those safe spaces for students in courses, the University of Manitoba is lucky enough to have elders in residence, and you know, if there's an Indigenous, non-Indigenous professor, and if there's a topic that's particularly sensitive in terms of Indigenous issues, to use those resources at universities. And I encourage every university across Canada to make those resources available for non-Indigenous professors and for, you know, for students in general.
What is your role at the University of Manitoba?
I'm the co-president of the Aboriginal Students Association.
I guess in university classrooms it would be a little bit different. The conversations can turn into more debate. What are some ways that university professors can maybe support university students, Indigenous university students who are probably often outnumbered?
You know, if you think about that would. Sorry, could you just frame that question again?
Like what is a better way that a university prof could maybe teach something like residential schools to a large classroom?
Mm-hmm. You know what? I think being able to give the students to have that dialogue within the classroom, and you know, one of the things in university that really kind of struck a chord with me was I had a class with Dr. Valandra, and he, you know, you have to remember that. Universities are an institution on themselves, and to decolonize those institutions within your own classrooms is very important. And one practice we took is that we, instead of, you know, having the traditional seat, and then a professor, you know, doing a lecture, to have a circle, to have a conversation amongst intellectuals, because that's what, you know, and that's what's happening in universities. It's about driving those conversations forward and giving students an opportunity not only to be just lectured at and taught something, but to give them an opportunity to speak on their experience, and to give them, you know, an opportunity to have a say in reconciliation, or have a say in the dialogue of that conversation.
Thank you, Noah. So I'm going to go to Facebook again, and I'll ask the question, and hopefully one of you in the audience would be able to answer the question. We do have a question from Breno Diego Martins. They ask, considering that it took over 100 years for the Canadian government to recognize the consequences of the residential schools, I wanted to ask, why did it take so long for the truth to be recognized? Got it. Can you stand up, please?
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm Ernie. I'm Ojibwe from the Robinson Superior Treaty. The first treaty in Canada that was signed by Her Majesty the Queen. It was handed down to the Union, to Dominion of Canada. And if you ever take a look at the treaty books that were signed or written in Canada, this is the first treaty of Canada that was written in 1850. The Canadian government has never recognized the Robinson Superior Treaty. If you take any textbook, that's the one treaty that has This is the greatest thing that I don't understand, because when the treaties were signed, they were signed with Indian people. Every time there's a government elected, We went from Indians to Aboriginals to First Nations, and this latest government came up with Indigenous people. So where are we going to find our identity as Indian people with a treaty? And I think these things are asking more questions than answers for reconciliation, because it's separating us further and further. And when we take a look at our political establishment, I mean, we have treaties, but then we also have the Indian Act that takes away our right as Indian people to, like our elders talked earlier about being equal. The foundation principle of Canada has been based on supremacy of God and the rule of law, meaning that we are all equal here tonight. There's no one above or no one below. We're all equal. But our political system has put a burden on society to separate us from everybody else. I mean, is there an Italian Act? No. Is there a Mennonite Act? No. But you know what? We have an Indian Act that been passed by Parliament of Canada to take away our rights as Indian people or Indigenous people. So basically, it's always been coming down to the justice system and our political powers that we elect. And to me, that's where everything is at.
Thank you. I guess that does bring up a good point about the doctrine of discovery, but we're going to go back to Ismaila.
Thank you very much, Leonard, and thank you very much, Ernie. We are going to take more questions from the crowd. The CBC's Marcy Marcuse is over there.
Hey, okay, I've got 3. And then I'll be coming to that side of the room. I see some hands over there too. So let's start with Bonnie. Hello. Do you mind standing? Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Can I read this or do you want to read this? Bonnie's answer what made her decide to attend tonight. Do you want to read a bit of that, Bonnie?
It's the educate to eliminate racism and strive towards reconciliation together.
What does it mean to you then, reconciliation, when you wrote that, when you thought about it, Bonnie?
Well, for educate, I guess school, class comes to mind, because I had to take a Native Studies class here in the city to hear about treaties, to hear about residential schools. They don't teach that kind of thing in mainstream high school. You have to seek it out. So it creates ignorance for me. There's a lot of information missing in mainstream schools. And I think if everybody knew the real history of how we came to be where we are today, maybe some ideas about my people would change. I'm Treaty 2, registered under 271-007-0801.
So you have that background personally, but you had to take a university class to be filled in to learn about that history.
Yeah, I went to university about 10 years ago, sat in a Canadian politics, about 298 of them hadn't heard of the Indian Act, didn't understand what it was and how it affects us as Aboriginal people in Canada, and the law I guess we fall under. Tried to explain it one time in similar form. There's no, there's no Caucasian Act, there's no Filipino Act, but there's an Indian Act, and it pretty much says everything we can and can't do, dictates our lives.
So when we were hearing before about people that feel when they work towards reconciliation, there are some people that feel, especially within the Indigenous communities that have made such headway and been working on this, for the last 2.5 years since these 94 recommendations came out. And then there's other people still walking around that don't have a clue. How do we close that gap? How do we begin to close that gap? Is it with education? Is it with our relationships? Like, what do you think?
It has to be action. Like Leah mentioned earlier, it has to be action. There's a lot of talk, a lot of words, a lot of, actions, spoken, but we need to see it. People need to see it to feel it.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Yep.
I have a question for Ryan Moran, and then I have someone else. I'm not sure, Ismaila, where we're at with. Can we take our question?
Recognition that all life is sacred, right? And that water is life, right? Is fundamental to the reconciliation work that needs to happen. Because how can we talk about having respectful relationships with only all of creation? If we are, you know, sacred beings, if this is a sacred journey, if this is just a spiritual journey that way, if life is sacred in and of itself, and we know that it is, why are we privileging certain types of life over others? Because that's what's gotten us into trouble. What has happened in this country is that certain ways of appearing give one a right to have life over others. That's why right now we live in a society where Indigenous peoples live shorter lives. It's a valuing or a hierarchy of life. And that's wrong. That's simply straight up wrong. And that hierarchy of life extends into a much broader context of natural life in the world.
How much do you think is in the definition? That changes the frame on what's it worth to you, doesn't it?
What does, and this is again what the elder said, let's not underestimate the depths of waters that we find ourselves in. And this is where, as the Commission gave us, the first principle of reconciliation being that it is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the land is woven throughout there. And the concept of free, prior, and informed consent is woven throughout there as a mechanism to allow traditional concepts and ways of seeing a relationship with the land manifest themselves in Canadian society. Because we have to remember, like, we are living in a society that has been created for us. This is not the only way that we can, all sorts of other ways that we have lived as humans. And everybody in this room comes from a particular cultural background where there was choices that were made. So we live in structural, within structural realities, and we have to be aware of the structures, but we're also have been forced into certain realities. And there are alternate ways of living life to answer age-old questions that we have as a human family that we need to be exploring and need to be adopting if we're going to solve some of these big challenges.
Thanks so much, Ryan Moran. Marcy, you have another question up there.
I actually have quite a personal story that someone would like to share. Did you want to about Please say I got your last name right, did I?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. So Allison, you wanted to share something that happened to your daughter.
Yes. My daughter attends a high school here in the city. We've been here for 4 years because I've been going to school for the past 4 years. When they were talking about education and how if there's enough awareness, if there's enough education out there for the non-Indigenous people, I don't think there is personally, because my daughter, she's 16, she goes to a high school here, and she happened to be late that one day, and one of the classmates, a non-Indigenous boy, asked my niece where she was. So my niece said she's running late. Oh, she's probably in the river, is what he said. I was kind of upset, but we dealt with it at that school, but I don't think there's enough education out there, and there's no respect for our people today. And I think that that's what needs to be addressed right away.
How did the school deal with it?
Well, it was just, oh, we'll bring the parents in, we'll talk about it, and that was that. They never got back to me, and I'm not sure if they ever did that, but I did ask my daughter what the outcome was, and they said that they apologized. But even that, they should still teach, they should still educate, they should still be respectful toward our people, because our people have gone through too much already. We don't need to continue facing this racism in a city, because even when you go to stores, it's still there. My friend here just, me and her were just talking about a situation where we went shopping or just kind of looking around in the stores, and right away when you walk in, they'll say security camera, section 4, or they follow you around in a store. So I don't know if it'll ever change. I hope it does in my lifetime, but we shall see, I guess. But all we ask is respect our people.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Allison. We can stay with crowd. Leonard has someone that wants to speak. I know there's someone here as well. I'm just not sure. Leonard?
Okay, yep, we do have somebody here. Colin Musso, one of my old teachers.
Let's go there.
Okay, Colin wants to come and teach everybody here. I told him not to do a 1-hour lecture. Is this good for you?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, come this way. I gotta hold the mic. I gotta keep.
So you're not twisting your necks? All right, my name's Colin Musso. I'm with Ojibwe, Dakota, from Sandy Bay here in Manitoba. I'd like to acknowledge the elders that are here, and I don't call them residential school survivors. Yeah. You see, we have been doing it. I worked at Children of the Earth for 14 years. We did it for 14 years. It's like any other curriculum within the school division, all across Canada, any other school. But the funding was cut off. Now, whose fault was that? The government. It seems like once we're getting ahead, we're starting to, what you call healing, education, health, all these great fundamental healing opportunities that we have. In many ways, they get cut off. Why? Are they afraid? I don't know. But I continue to do this across the country. I just came back from Toronto. I work out of Toronto, actually. I was there for 2 months, and I work in a health center. And I've been going to Toronto for 10 years now. And I do my best to educate. I do my best to let people know all walks of life. I have friends over there that are Italian, Greek, Filipino, Mohawk, Iroquois, Mi'kmaq, all across this nation. And a lot of people there, they want to know their identity. Because if you really think about it, when Canada was formed, I bet you somebody in this room has native blood in them. Yeah, both of us. Let me finish. That is either Ukrainian or German. It's true. Now we speak of the truth. Reconciliation, we could look at that in many ways. But we have to go to the truth. To understand the truth in our traditions, that turtle teaches the truth. We call this Turtle Island. There's a reason why we call this Turtle Island. Within that turtle's back, there's 13 markings. There's 13 moons in a year in our calendar. I don't know where the other one got lost in the other calendar, I don't know. But there are 13 moons. Outside of that turtle's back, there are 28 markings. Every 28 days, that's a life cycle. So the truth comes from there. To know the truth, you got to feel the truth. Not here, in your heart. So we got to start with the truth first all across this nation. Hey, we're all brothers and sisters. You know, we could talk and talk and talk and talk. But where we go with it is a whole different story, a whole different genre. And who's getting impacted by it? It's been going on for over 500 years. It's been going on for thousands of years. You know, I always get reminded who I am in my travels. And there's old words that remind me of where I come from. And they involve dinosaur time. How to say it, dinosaurs? A mammoth? A shingosum. That's truth. We didn't cross no Bering Strait, I'll tell you that. So we can look at many, many aspects within our lives and what has happened. But we all need to hear the truth. That's where it's going to start, the truth. We can talk about healing, caring and sharing, cleansing, but where's that going to come from? It's going to come from the truth. You know, I'm not ashamed anymore. I'm way beyond that. I've dealt with too much racism in my life. That don't bother me no more. So, to start with the truth, that's where we're going to understand and learn about each other. Understanding, learning and understanding. This whole country. It's not only in Canada, it's in the United States also. In the United States, they were called Indian schools. And this idea of, you know, Indigenous, First Nation, you know, the proper word is, as we understand it in our language, Anishinaabeg. Anishinaabeg means everybody. Doesn't matter if you're Mohawk, Iroquois, whoever across this nation, Anishinaabeg. Not no Aboriginal or whatever, you know. It's Anishinaabeg. That's who we are. That's the proper word. I could say that because I'm pretty fluent in our language, so. And I'd like to thank the prayer for, you know, Padamaya. Miigwech, miigwech.
Thank you, Colin.
It's funny how I ended up here. You know, I heard about this and I went and delivered some medicine today because I work with medicines. But I got to leave. I have some people that came in from Saskatchewan to come and see me. So thank you very much.
I thought you were going to roast me there. Just wait, let me hold the mic. Let me hold the mic.
This guy, I taught him for many years. And it's good to see you where you are. Good to see you.
Okay. So we're going to go to Ismaila.
What I love about that is we learned something about Leonard from his former teacher there. Leonard learned that you may have finished school, but you're always a student. And then we all got a lesson from his teacher, which was wonderful. Thank you very much. I am joined now by Marie Wilson, one of the 3 commissioners of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She's made the trip here, by the way, from Saskatchewan, where she participated in the CBC Asks town hall there, and she's not done yet. After tonight, she's en route to Whitehorse to do the same. So we welcome to Yellowknife. Oh, I'm sorry. I got to get these places straight. You're so jet set, I can't even keep track of where you're going. So thank you, Marie, for joining us here and being part of this conversation. What is your reaction to the mood tonight?
To the mood tonight?
The mood, yeah.
Well, it's pretty tame. I think we have to get a bit more agitated than that.
Yeah?
I mean in the sense of energy for the big work that still lies ahead. You know, we said in the Commission's report that reconciliation, unlike the Commission itself, which was ending, that reconciliation was just beginning, and that it would take a long time to try to turn around and address what had happened over the course of 150 years. And that we needed to suit up for that it would be hard work, that it would be difficult work. And I think when I hear comments tonight like reconciliation is becoming a buzzword, as I one time heard someone say in Ottawa, the flavor of the month, that speaks to my outrage, because I think we cannot afford to get sick of talking about something that we've barely begun. And you know, the question that you're asking, what is it worth to me? It's worth everything to me. I heard from over 1,500 residential school survivors, just myself personally, and we recorded statements from almost 7,000. And when the Commission wrapped up, I made a promise. It's emotional for me even to think about it. I made a promise to the survivors, and my promise was this, that I would never stop telling their stories, and I would never stop doing what I could towards reconciliation as long as there was breath in my limbs. And I think that we all have to do that, because it isn't about us. It's about our children and their children, and it's about the well-being of humanity in this space that we call Canada and the wider world. And we have big work to do. We can't get tired of it, and we can't quibble over the term reconciliation and what does the word mean.
You speak of it being called a buzzword or flavor of the month, and that being representative or reflective of an attitude that you're well, the word you used was irritated with, upset with. I'm
actually excited by it. I'm not irritated with it. I'm simply saying that I think we can't allow the word itself to take us down or to frustrate us. I'm excited because there are many good things that are going on, both in your province here, I know there are, and in various other parts of the country. I know there are huge challenges and many things that are so far from being even the beginnings of good enough. But there are good things happening. There are good people trying to do better. We've got a room full of people here tonight. I know, and we all know, that even 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, a gathering of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people coming together to understand an issue that affects everyone would not have happened. And we wouldn't have had a CBC, frankly, that said, let's take on that work of tracking those calls to action, because so far it's not being done by the agency that we called for in our calls to action. So it needs to be tracked. That's part of our ability, is to hold our governments to account, to hold ourselves to account as the people who are the government fundamentally. We are the ones that set the direction for the people we elect, and we have to hold them to account. We have to hold ourselves to account on what we ourselves are doing as well.
How do you keep everyone in this country energized and motivated when it comes to reconciliation, when we are hearing from those who are frustrated that they feel that this is all on their back, that they're carrying all of this, and you're hearing from others who are speaking about this, maybe, I mean, I've heard some say, this isn't for me, this is for other people in this country. How do you keep everyone motivated to do that work that you say is going to take a very long time?
Yeah, and the first thing I do is keep myself motivated. You know, that I have a lot of control over, total control actually. And I think we all start there. That point was already made once this evening, that it starts with us. But I think one of the things that we need to do more than we've ever done before is speak up and counter those things that we hear that are either not true or unacceptable or need to be challenged. And if we speak up at times when we would have otherwise stayed quiet or stayed away or kept our heads down, that is an action. That can be a really important action. We've talked about truth tonight. Being well informed equips us for truth-telling. Continuing to invest in our own collective ignorance does not position us well for challenging truth. So we all have a responsibility to learn and to keep learning and to know more. And we need to become, we talked earlier about relationships. We need to create relationships. Relationships just don't fall upon us. We have to invest in them. We have to make them happen. We have to create spaces where we intentionally and consciously bring together people who have not sat in the same rooms before, people who have not been in the same workplaces before, people often who have not been in the same schools before. We need to be intentional and strategic about how we make that happen, and we need to be determined, because that's where we whittle away the differences and start to understand our collective humanity. And I think that really, if we understand that this is about human rights, and we are a country that brags about our notions of human rights, and this is an area where we've fallen so far short that there's room for everyone, and indeed there's need for everyone to do their part and find their place.
When it comes to change, one might think, and it's human nature to put all your energy and time into the nut that's the hardest to crack. I understand that you don't focus on those you feel you can't reach. Tell us a bit more about that approach and why you feel that's the way to go.
Well, you have to make a difference where you know you can make a difference. My dad told me years ago when I was a kid, if you're smashing your head against a wall and the wall's not going to give, stop smashing your head against the wall. You have to, I think, look for opportunities, look for chances of collaboration. Bring your best creative minds. I see Tina Keeper sitting over there. What kind of genius does it take to say, I know, let's support making a ballet about residential school? To take the spaces that you have, the levers that you have, and say, how can I make this be different and be better? Teachers who say, gee, now I have to teach this stuff, I don't know anything about it. How many in this room are residential school survivors or intergenerational survivors? Look at all the experts in our midst. Call upon new experts and don't assume the ones you've always had in place are the only ones who know anything. I think we look around and find caring ways to actually know each other. I sat in a university class that I led at McGill University last year, and I had 25 young people there from all various countries of the world, and it was a multidisciplinary course. And I invested the first day in a circle of introducing ourselves to each other so that we would know who we would be in community with for that course. And my students told me, and these were all 4th, 5th year students, it was the first time in their university career that they had ever knowingly been in the same class as Indigenous students, because no one had ever asked them before and no one had ever put value on self-identifying in any particular way and how people chose to be known. So some of the things can be very simple, but they can be so profoundly transformational. And I think that only happens when you create an opportunity and give yourself the gift of opportunity of hearing from people that you have not heard from before and learning things that you have not known before. And I think that's not work that we should look at as hard and I want to do it and gee, it feels really uncomfortable, but rather the gift we are giving ourselves, which is a deep enrichment of our own lives and of our countries.
Now I'm going to ask you one more question because I don't want to be the responsible one for taking your voice away for the next CBC Asks here. What do you say to Debbie Kershane, Wambadi Wakita, Louise Hall, Peter Yellowquill, who is here, these residential school survivors? I mean, what hope do you see out there for them?
Well, the first thing that I want to say to them, is thank you, because we all as a country owe them an enormous debt of gratitude for their courage in speaking up and teaching us through the sharing of their experiences. And I also want to tell them that I love them. I don't know all of them, I do know some of them. And I say that because one of the most recurring stories we heard from the residential school students was the deep deprivation of feeling that they were loved by anyone, and registering for themselves what chaos that created for them in their own life, believing that their own life was not worth it, and not knowing how to give that to their children in the ways that their children could receive and could benefit from. And I think that we need to make sure that we are taking care of our children, all of us, on our home fronts, so that we are not repeating those deprivations, I would say, that are soul-sucking and that are life-destroying. But what I would say as well to them, and to the 80,000 other residential school survivors who are part of that class action lawsuit, I will not stop telling your stories, and I will not stop reminding us all that we are in the midst of, in a way, what we could call a citizens' revolt. Because our Truth and Reconciliation Commission did not happen because the government said, hey, let's have one. On the contrary, the government fought it. It was 80,000 residential school survivors who are citizens of this country who said, we are going to take action and stand up for what happened that was not right. And it is that move on their part that created the leverage for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which has obligated all kinds of national dialogue, but it has also obligated governments to act and to pledge, and now it obligates the rest of us as citizens to hold our governments to account, to be the citizens, the informed citizens that we need to be, and to be the loving parents that our children have made so plain they need us to be for them.
Marie, thanks so much for being here tonight.
It's my great honor. Thank you.
Marie Wilson was one of 3 commissioners of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, back out to Jillian Taylor, who is, you have a question or a comment, or is this from one of the cards?
Yeah, it's from one of the cards. So Marianne Clark approached me and handed me her card, and she wanted me to read out her question. It's really powerful. So her question is, how can we talk about reconciliation from the loss of children when we have thousands of Indigenous children continuing to be removed from their families, communities, lands, languages, and identities? So as we know, this is like a really important topic in Manitoba. Upwards of 90% of the kids that are in the care of Child and Family Services are Indigenous. So I don't know if anybody wants to talk about that. Does anyone have an experience with CFS or who works in child welfare that maybe would want to give an opinion? Peter wants to weigh in. Hi. Oh, I'm going to hold this for you.
All right, you're going to
You can hold my hand if you want. Here, I'll hold this. Here.
Okay.
I'll make sure. What do you want to say, Peter?
First of all, it's a real honor to be here. I wasn't sure who was going to be here, but you're here because you care. And I don't blame you for the residential schools, unless you were there. It's what we told our neighbors. What we're seeing, I'm from Long Plain. That means I'm a Christian. And I walked a traditional walk, and it led me to where I am today. What you're seeing is what the cancer we brought home from the residential schools. Generational cancer. It's a cancer that eats at our souls. We brought home the sexual abuse. We brought home the physical abuse. We brought home the neglect. And we're having a horrendous time wrestling with ourselves. The laws that were made, I believe, were made in good faith, but we've determined one or two things that allowed the genocide. There was a doorway to the genocide. I heard the judge say in the Supreme Court about cultural genocide. That was a comment. It's not a finding, nor is it a ruling of the court. We had asked, I speak plainly. I learned to fight in a residential school against your kids with these. And I'm still fighting today. But I'm sometimes fighting our own people because some of our leaders are neglecting our people. I come from a community where we're millionaires. As I know, we beat Canada and the RCMP over the treaty land. But we're neglecting our people. I'm going to tell you the truth. You want to know the truth? In my community, I went before a judge because I was charged. I went after a drug dealer, and I got charged. He was selling to kids. I counted 14 dealers, and 6 of them were dealing meth. I told the judge that's where I live. I hear the leadership. I watched them on TV. I was a chief for 8 years. I sat with Phil Fontaine, and I sat on various committees. But I'm not hearing what our people need to hear at our home, my homeland. I'm not a Canadian. I'm not a Manitoban. That land that I live on is not Canada. It's not Manitoba. A kid and dying, my homeland. You came from many parts of the earth. You were fleeing oppression. I heard about your histories. The doors are still open to this, what the elders called a sacred and a holy land. Yet in this sacred and this holy land, we're the poorest. We've been stripped. In residential school, you were stripped and beaten, sometimes 2 or 3 times for the same offense. Don't you love justice? My son and many of his generation are in jail right now because no one is putting up any resistance to what your people are beginning to feel, your children, and it's the meth. Our neighbors in Portage talk about it. It's right here in our homes. So, the residential school, part, I hate to say it, some of it's our own bloody fault. We have not learned to be parents yet. It's hard when you see the generations behind me never knowing their parents as parents. You see, this week alone, there was at least 3 apprehensions. We are trying to push hard to try and make the change in the law that would stop even our workers from taking those children, committing the same genocide as the Children's Aid Society of Manitoba, driven by that law that protects them. We need a different oversight. We need someone to oversee these people that have unbridled power over my children and my grandchildren. I think much about this. When we entered into this treaty, we gave our word. And I think about my mothers and my fathers and my grandfathers. Why did they not resist? Why did they not take up arms even? We gave our word we wouldn't. So we suffered. I asked my mother, "What happened, Mom? Anisha Jindi Mama. I said, what happened? How did this happen? We trusted them, she said. Many of my siblings, we suffered not only the residential school, we suffered the children's aid, we suffered the courts. My brother was killed at a police station here, not in cold blood. But when we stood up, no one, including the governor at Long Plain or anybody else in Manitoba, ever stood up for my brother. I was so honored when the Cree Nation stood up for J.J. Harper, but no one stood up for him. We spent, my life and my wife's taught me how to be a father. We are wrestling with, we thought we had alcohol under control. But now there's a different dragon, crack and coke. And now we have a greater dragon, meth. But the same law that allows red, yellow, black, or white to take that child out of there has not been improved enough, changed enough to force those workers to go into the homes and begin to work with those families. If nothing will change, I can tell you right now, nothing will change. I spend my life fighting chiefs, counselors, anybody that's going to try and keep up with the genocide. The province of Manitoba, the Premier of Manitoba, they must take up that challenge and change that law. You're not guilty of anything. You're not guilty of anything. That's what we told our neighbors around Portage. How can you be guilty? We're not that stupid to accuse you, okay, of some crime you did not commit. But there are people that drove this. Despite the good intentions, the law allowed and screened the genocide, and we had no resistance. We could not resist. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. All right, we're going to throw it over to Leonard now. He's going to give us some comments or questions from Facebook.
So we do have a comment here from somebody in the crowd. Sylvia, Sylvia, do you just want to introduce yourself?
Sylvia.
Sylvia. So go ahead.
When I was first thinking about what I was going to say, it was actually kind of along the lines of where I started to do actually just exactly what Bonnie had mentioned about self-reconciliation. And that was something I just started to do for myself about 5 years ago. But after hearing the story that was just shared, I'm switching gears a little bit. I was made a permanent ward of then, which was known as Children's Aid Society of Winnipeg. I was 12, 13 years old. Obviously was bumped around. Eventually ended up in a very stable foster home where I spent up until I was 16. I ended up going on independent living when I was 16. When I think back, you know, there certainly is the intergenerational effects. For the longest time, I always thought I never went to residential school, so I was okay. I always thought I was fine. And obviously learned that I wasn't fine when I started trying to understand myself, trying to accept the person that I see when I look in the mirror. for many, many years, I'm not going to say how old I am, I grew up under a great deal of shame that was placed upon me. But I realized it wasn't just about me, it was about every person out there, whether they had directly gone to residential school or if they were raised by a parent that went to residential school, or if they were a child in the child welfare system. Those systems you learn you don't learn is actually the thing. You don't learn how to be a parent. You are put into a situation where you can't hug. For those that went to, and I'm thinking of my ancestors that were present for that part. The stories, I think back now on what I heard from my families, like from my uncles and from my aunt. It took me a long time to understand where that came from, because I had so much internal hate for them not taking care of our family, them not taking care of our kids, or us as kids, that we ended up in a system that pretty much today that is no different than when I was that 13-year-old kid. You age out of care, you're put out to the street. For me, that's very disheartening to see that these, and again, I'm not gonna say how many years, all these years later, that is still happening. Nothing has changed. I like to be optimistic. I like to think that reconciliation can happen. You can call me a dreamer. Sometimes I get really frustrated with what's happening out there, and I get very negative about it. But for me, when I think about what does it mean to me, it really does mean sitting in rooms like this, where I can look around and people are actually listening. I've done other engagements where people are wanting to listen. If anything, that's a starting point. And I think I'll just...
I'll ask you really quickly, what would you say to the people that are non-Indigenous in this room?
The quick things I would say is, and I've shared this with other people, is to not just brush it off and say, just get over it, because you can't. When you, again, when you have your culture, you don't grow up in your culture, you don't grow up with the language. I didn't grow up with any of that. And the messages I got were, even in growing up, your partner, your choice of partner, better not be another brown face. That, I would say, is never think, just get over it. If anything, I ask you from the heart, just understand with compassion and respect.
Thank you, Sylvia.
And thank you very much, Leonard. Now, I'm just stepping in quickly to let you all know this is great, and it's wonderful that this is a space in which there is a lot of listening going on, and we want to listen more, but we only do have about 15 minutes left to fit comments and questions in. I just wanted to give you a heads up about that. We have many more questions and comments. Marcy Marcusa.
Okay, so I have 6 people that I've promised, so for right now I'm just going to get through those. And I also know that 3 of you have stories to share of reconciliation projects that are already on the go. Gail with her church, and another gentleman back there with your church. And then you're from Ontario with a project, right? So I'm going to do a radio trick here. Can you and you, sir, do you mind popping down here by Gail? That will be wonderful. And then we'll talk about all those reconciliation projects. And I'm just going to try to get you all on that way. And while you're making your way down here, sir, and I thank you, could you make your way down one more row? Would that be okay? Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to meet Daryl Cochran. Hi, Daryl.
Hi.
Daryl, you're do you mind standing? Are you comfortable with that? Is that okay? Okay, great. All right. Would you rather sit than sit? Let's sit. Come on, Daryl. I can tell. I know. I talk to lots of people, and you told me that you are an unrecognized survivor. Is that right? What does that mean? Where did you go to school?
I went to St. Joseph's. It's basically located right across the street from Polo Park. It's in that Empress Loop right there. They do have a new church up there in an apartment building there now. Back in 1979, from 1906, I believe, to 1979, there was this institution known as St. Joseph's. And people like to say it was an orphanage. And all my family was alive. My aunties, my uncles, my mom, my dad, my grandma, my grandpa. Okay. Thank you.
Take a sec. You're okay. Yeah.
It has come to my attention in these previous years that our governments, want to go ahead and build a personal care home for old people who are able to afford it. I don't think anybody in this room would be rich enough to afford what they want to build over there.
And they want to build it on the land, and one of the things about reconciliation that you understand is that those sites would be recognized where schools were. So this upsets you.
Yeah, it upsets, it really upsets me. What I did before when I heard about this is I was doing my own personal walks from Portage in Maine to the school and back. I have to go back. I don't want to go back, but I have to come back.
Why do you make that walk? What are you thinking about? Why do you do that?
It's just my own personal thing. I got no supports, nowhere, nothing. So it's something for me. That's all. My personal heroes are Carl Sagan, Neil deGrasse, and Stephen Hawking.
What is reconciliation worth to you? You came tonight. You've obviously thought about this deeply.
I want those elders who actually think that they speak for me to shut the fuck up.
Daryl's angry, and he expressed this to me, and we talked about it, and it's okay to be angry. You feel that you're not being represented in the narrative across Canada necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Seriously, I'm not, whatchamacallit, an acceptable Indian for the white people. That's what it comes down to. Because my language is so rough around the edges, and I put white people on edge. That's what I'm told. I come out, I speak truths. They're inconvenient, and some of them are inconvenient to me. I still speak them.
You must want, though, there to be some kind of middle ground in the community, or you wouldn't have come.
I'm just still waiting for middle ground. That's all. I still walk.
Thank you. We're going to learn about a couple of projects that are happening in a couple of places. Gail has a project with her church about reconciliation. Is that right, Gail?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Well, I attend the Living Word Temple, which is on Powers in Manitoba. And they're a Mennonite church. And the pastors are both, there's two of the pastors that practice reconciliation, or I don't know how to say that, but a friend of mine started to attend church there, and she was trying to convince me to attend there with her for quite a while. And So I finally went, and then I was shocked to learn that two of the pastors are actually they attend sweats. They learn. They go out to Roseau River and they learn with a Medewan elder. They have their spirit names.
Why did that shock you, and what did that mean to you?
Because they're white and they're Mennonite and they're pastors of a church. And I've never met anyone with all those three, you know, like white pastor, you know. You know, they have their spirit names. And when they started to learn about the Indigenous culture and attend sweats and ceremonies, there was backlash from their congregation, and a lot of them left the church, and and our pastor talked about how lonely it was when that happened, and so now he's got a strong circle. They've actually invited me to speak at conferences. They do a blanket exercise with other men.
So you're talking at church conferences now?
Yeah, and they asked me to like sing some like on the drum. And I guess the one thing that impacts me the most about that is when we do the blanket exercise. And at the end, there's usually one or two people that will come up to me and they're feeling really guilty and remorseful. And they ask me, you know, like, what can we do? You know, I'm so sorry that my ancestors did that to you. And I never have an answer for them. I said, I don't know what you can do, but I do know that you can buy me land, you can buy me a house. Just putting that out there for you.
And now Gail, grab the mic. Gail, what was your last name?
Fiddler.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I hope I can come and do a story in your church. Sounds really good. Thank you. You're welcome. Okay, so we have a lot of hands up, and I'm not sure if we're staying here. I know there's a hand there. Maybe one of my colleagues could cross the room. You told me that you have a church project as well that you wanted to share about reconciliation directly.
Yes, my name is Mike Deal, and I'm from Willow Lake Baptist Church, and we're down in Southdale, so very, we have a fairly multicultural congregation. It's a small congregation. We were invited by the City of Winnipeg to sign the Winnipeg Indigenous Accord, which I had the honor of doing as a representative of the church about 10 months ago. And part of that was to commit to, what actions are we going to take. So two of our commitments was dealing with the Truth and Reconciliation Recommendation number 48 around the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. I spoke at our national conference in support of a motion that was adopted at the time. So it's the denomination of Baptists from Western Canada, so Manitoba and West. And Baptists are known to be fairly conservative. Not my particular church, but there was some churches that voted against that. But unfortunately, I didn't hear from them. They didn't speak about why they would vote against that. The other recommendation...
If you would have heard from them, what would you have said?
What would I have said? Well, I did speak at length about it. I kind of told them what I thought they needed to hear. And I think it goes to what you're feeling about the way you maybe make people like me uncomfortable, and I'm okay with that. I don't need to be comfortable. In fact, I darn well should be uncomfortable for the things that the settlers have done in God's name. And so yeah, I don't need to be comfortable, and so coming here, I'm learning to be an ally. And it keeps me humble, and I try to be compassionate, and I try to do the work to inform. So in our church, the other one is around recommendation number 60, which is to educate our church congregation. So
You're extending from there.
Yeah.
I'm going to move to another gentleman here because I promised. Mike, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Gail. Hello. I think you're tall enough sitting down, sir. You're from Ontario.
I am. I'm from Rainier River First Nations along the border, close to about halfway between Rainier River and Fort Francis. I don't know.
And what's your full name, sir?
Brian Cochran. I'm not sure I'm related to the gentleman, but we share the same last name. My kids often say to me, "Oh, Dad's telling a story again." So sometimes it goes long, but I'll try to keep this one short. Now, I just wanted to relay a little bit of my own personal experience and the type of work that we're trying to do back home. I've never lived in the community until about 9 years ago, and so I was into the middle of my 40th year before I moved back to the area and the community. Never lived there prior to that. So we have a group there called Manitoba Tigong, which is the name of our community, but more commonly known as, like I said, Rainier First Nations, and the plural is intentional. We have a group called Manitoba Tigong Indian Residential School Survivors Working Group, and what our group does is we have a group of about 8 individuals, and many of them are from the same family, and I think three or four of them are siblings, in fact. So so I became involved with this group about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's been a tremendous experience for me. I never went to a residential school myself. In fact, didn't go to any school until I was almost 7 years old. I literally lived in the sticks until I was almost 7 years old. Spoke the language exclusively until that time. I went to school first day in April, approaching my 7th year, and did not speak English at all. So English is my second language, and like the lady said before, I'm fluent in English.
What's been valuable to you about attending that group as you're thinking about reconciliation?
What we're doing is, and this is the actual part of the story I wanted to tell. I just wanted to give a little bit of background there. What we're doing is we initially started out as a group to create a monument. And so we managed to get the monument funded, and it's there now. And then the group said, "Now what?" So we've been doing Orange Shirt Days. We've been, I'm not sure if anybody here is familiar with that.
Yeah, in Manitoba as well, Orange Shirts for residential school survivors. Yeah.
For those here that aren't familiar with it, look it up. So we've been doing that, and we also did a Secret Path presentation as well. But I think the most important thing that we've been doing, and I think it's beginning to take hold, is we decided to make our group available to the schools in our area. And we have two school boards in our area. One's a Catholic board, and the other is the I don't know what you call it, the regular school board. And the Catholic school has taken us up on it, and they're gung ho to go with us. And we've visited their school, and they've taken part in our Orange Shirt Days, and also.
So you've gathered together and then reached out to try to offer education within schools.
Yes, and I think that's an important way to go, because there's opposition even in our community from other survivors. I say there's what eight of them, because I'm part of the group, but I'm not a survivor. And there are people who didn't want their name on that monument. In fact, so there are people who are dealing with this in different ways. But to me, I think the most important thing that we're doing is, somebody mentioned education earlier, and that's what we're doing. The group that we're dealing with are primarily grade 7s and grade 8, and they're coming out again. In fact, we're doing a recognition powwow in September. So I think this is the way to go. And I just want to say one final.
Yep, go ahead. One quick.
One of the things I think that's important to say, I'm quite pleased that most of the faces, 80%, 90% of the faces here are non-Indigenous. And one of the takeaways I think needs to be, we had a gentleman come to our group and he said something about some of my friends aren't my friends anymore. Go home, everybody here is probably on some type of social media, go home, put it on your Facebook or whatever it is that you do, and say, I went to this thing, and I'm assuming this is going to be available after the fact on Facebook, right? So, and give them the link. Say this is what I went to, and these are the type of things that we talked about. We heard some very
to spread it out. To spread it out. We're going to move to a couple more folks because of time only. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I apologize because it is the time of the night where we try to get everyone's voices in and leave no one standing. So we're not trying to be disrespectful. Ismaila?
And thank you very much. And I will just point out we are about to take our last question for the evening. We have a finite amount of time and we would love to get to everyone, but this is going to be our last question. Leonard Monkman has someone in the audience.
Hello.
Where are you first? I'm Lori, and I was born in North Battleford. My mom's family's from the Battlefords, my dad from North Battleford, and all our extended family is in that area. When I was 4 years old, we moved to Manitoba. My mom, dad, 2 sisters, and I, and my parents split shortly after. My mom married a residential school survivor and former chief of a community, so my upbringing was a very different one, where I lived in 2 worlds, essentially. In my home, we ate deer stew, went to the reserve and fished, and I grew up on bannock and hamburger soup, and my stepdad speaks Saulteaux fluently, and that was my world at home. And then my other world was back in Saskatchewan. And when the Colton Boushie verdict came out, I posted on Facebook how heartbreaking and tragic it was, and I wept for him, for his mom, for all of us. And the amount of hate that came back at me from family members and friends of family members, yeah, it was tough. I had to sever some relationships, which is fine with me because those aren't the relationships I want to keep. But it's a struggle to be a settler ally when I feel like all I'm doing is bashing my head against the wall, and I feel stuck sometimes where do I go? Because truth to me is one of the most important things, and that's on all these Facebook feeds, and truth is what needs to happen. There's so much, stuff about the welfare system, first of all, not just residential schools, but welfare system and taxes and all this. There's so much truth that needs to be told in everything. And a big part too, I think, is relationships. And in education, building relationships is so important. And for me, I'm on the other side of it, I think, because I did form relationships. I think 90% of the people that are posting those things on Facebook and having those kind of opinions have never even shared oxygen with an Indigenous person. And so for me, it's not for teachers and anyone who's working on the calls to action. I think it's so great moving forward, and this is something that needs to happen, but I'd encourage people to not just use books and videos, but to get actual living Indigenous people who have lived experiences to come in and form relationships with non-Indigenous kids and people, and hopefully those kids in those classrooms will be like me as a child who walks in those 2 worlds but can come out and say, hey, that's not okay, and start seeing Indigenous people as human beings and not justifying and saying he got what he deserves when an innocent boy takes a gunshot to the back of the head. And I think that's a big part of it too, as a lot of people do not see Indigenous people as human beings. And where does that start? It's building relationships. So thank you.
Thank you. Now, as I had mentioned, that is the last comment or question we can take this evening, but I think that the truth is we are the kindling in this, right? I mean, the conversation doesn't stop here. We're the kindling, and we go out there and we light this fire everywhere. We have conversations with people, so we should share and continue to talk, and even more importantly, we can continue to listen. We are about to run over our time, and I want to acknowledge a couple of people who we meant to get to and we didn't get a chance to speak with. Steve Heinrichs. Steve is the Director of Indigenous Relations with Mennonite Church Canada. He actually crosses the country working with Mennonite, Anglican, and United congregations to raise awareness and understanding of reconciliation. So please put your hands together for Steve Heinrichs, please. Also, we got just a quick moment with him, but Noah Wilson is not only the co-president of the Aboriginal Students Association at the University of Manitoba, also one of the organizations of the upcoming Reconciliation campaign launch. It's a massive effort to better include the Indigenous voice in post-secondary education curriculum, staff, and student representation. Put your hands together for Noah Wilson. And to wrap our evening up, I would like to welcome back to the stage Elder Marge Rosselli.
Mitakuas, all my relatives. And we are all related. We're all living creatures created by Wakantaga Creator. And that also includes the land and all living things. You know, our people a long time ago called everything Dakushkashka. It means even rocks, everything has a spirit because there's always something moving in it. And now we know that all living things are comprised of molecules that bounce around, move around. And from there, we know that all living things come from the Creator, and we are all relatives. There was a Anishinaabe brother here who spoke about his term for the people. Our term in Dakota is Ikjewi Chashta. It means the common man, because long ago on Turtle Island, we were all brown-skinned, and we were a common sight to each other. So that is what Ikjewi Chashta means, the common man, when we refer to each other, the first peoples of this land. We talked about lots of different things here tonight. The stories are powerful. I thank you all for sharing. You know, they're all strands, your stories. If we weave them together and braid them, we'll make a really strong rope that we can use to help each other, pull each other along, do whatever we can to live together, as I said earlier, in peace and harmony on equal terms. And while we're under the Indian Act, we're still wards, you know, wards of the crown. You know, everybody has a tat nowadays. I think that's what they call tattoos. Well, even Grandma has a tattoo on her arm. And that is placed there for a reason. Because under the Indian Act, we all have a number. We are identified by a number. And it's a starting point for me to carry on discussions about why do I have this number? And I always say, well, that's my expiration number. They did that to a group of people a long time ago during the Second World War. And the last two numbers, the first three numbers, 290, identify Sioux Valley. 00850 is my personal number. 01 indicates that I'm a full-blooded Indian. My last name is Italian. I married Italian, a Rickeraw Indian from Fort Berthold, North Dakota. And I lost my status under the Indian Act because he was not recognized as an Indian in Canada. So in 1986, I suddenly became brown again under Bill C-31, and I was, lo and behold, I was Indian again. So I'm never gonna lose sight of the fact that I'm now Indian. I have my number. But what I'm getting at is 01 says I'm a full blood. And my son, because his dad is not recognized as is an 02. And if he marries another 02, their children become 03. And in that way, they're getting rid of First Nations status. So we're being, you know, exterminated on paper through policy. And many people don't know that. But as long as we're under the Indian Act, and Indian Act sets us apart, you know, everybody will carry this number until it wears out, down to 03 or 04, whenever the cutoff date is, and we're no longer status. And the only way you can prevent that is if you marry another 01. Then your children will be 01. But you know, our communities are small. We have to look outside our communities. But that's just a history lesson. And I want to say thank you to all for all your stories. They're so powerful. You know, when I look at children, I do a lot of observing in my old age. And you see little babies in shopping carts, little toddlers, and you say hi, and they all smile, or they wave. And then some look at you, oh, they're scared of you. Or, you know, they don't know what to do. But that's a reflection of their upbringing. How are they being raised? What is the attitude of their parents and their grandparents? And so as we go forward, we need to teach our children to be accepting of each other, that we are all equal. And you know, I sat here and I listened to all these stories, and there are some angry ones. They have a right to be angry. Some are still very sorrowful over things that happen. Yes, when I think about it, I can be very sad too. I had to go back to my upbringing and to go into my spiritual practices as a Dakota woman to find healing. But I'm also a lay clergy in the Anglican Church, and I'm the Southern Elder for the Anglican Church. So I work with other churches. United Church has been very helpful to us because they ran some of the residential schools, and they ran the one in Brandon that we own now. The site in Grand Valley belongs to Sioux Valley. And we're working to try and establish a healing lodge there to help our Manitoba brothers and sisters who need help to move forward in their lives. And we're working hard on that, and I know Peter Yellowquill has been there to their gatherings, and he's a great supporter of our work that we're still, you know, trying to make a reality. It is a vision that we have. And we all need to stand together and help each other. To me, reconciliation is restoration. We need to restore our languages, our way of life, our respect for one another, our respect for the land. I was in Standing Rock December 4th when Barack Obama, former president, signed the document that's halted the pipeline, and we rejoiced. You know, he made us happy, if for a very short time. And it felt like we won against the government, against the big oil company. Of course, the next president came along and changed that. But we still felt that our prayers had been answered, because that camp that was there was a spiritual camp. There were no weapons, there was nothing there to harm anybody. Everything was done in prayer, ceremonies. And so we felt that God, Wakantaka, had heard our prayers. And even for a short while, you know, it was victory for our people. Veterans came from all over the country to support the First Nations there. They were willing to turn against their own people to protect the water protectors. And so I just want to say that I'm honored to be here and to see all different peoples here, to share, to get to know each other's stories, to hear one another, really hear one another. Look at each other through the heart, through your third eye. Understand where we've been, where we're trying to go now. Let us help each other that way. I'm gonna sing a song after I pray, and it's going to be a song to heal the body and the mind and spirit, and it's a Dakota song. But I would be saying the closing prayer now. So join me in your own way as we all pray together. Atako ni na ota I wong taka pe o ka hana okay. Chante o shicha pe okay. Tako yong pipshin. At ka o kach na khmike ya be. Toka te ki tama onima. O hoki chira o shiki chira ma onita. O hechi o shicha hui chiche. Atate ya po tachano po kamieche. O shima kiraga. Dina tako Iwohada kapkina tokata ke was tek the itch na itch chipta chinchich. Ushmakile. The song says, Creator, look this way and hear this prayer. I do this so that my people will live. Creator, we suffer. Tukashira ahi duam ay chanu pakide iye kiayo hey hemida kuyeob wanikta Te chamu hai Tugashira Yotie Wakiel hai Tugashira Ahi Tuaya hai Chanu Pakide Ie Kiayo He Emita Kuyeob Wanikta Cha Te Chamu He Tugashira Iotie Wakiel Hey. Mitakuos. Amen.
And we're going to get me back on microphone so I'm not just blasting my regular voice into your ears. Hopefully, we have started some good dialogue here. Thank you to those who shared their personal stories, their fears, and their ideas to achieve reconciliation. Thank you to everyone at St. John's High School. Clearly, this inner city high school is truly a community-level example of true reconciliation. And as I was saying here, the conversation doesn't stop after we leave this room. We welcome your conversation on Facebook. And of course, in the coming days, portions of this evening's town hall will play out on CBC Radio, CBC Television News, and our website. I'll let you know that even on my show, we do a regular call-in. So when we want to talk about this, when we open up our phone lines, please call in and join in that conversation as well. And while the town hall has